Welcome to Religion in the American Experience, a podcast that explores how religion has shaped America and how America has shaped religion, which can help us as we wrestle with complex questions of American governance and purpose in the 21st century. Here's your host, Chris Stevenson.
Hi, here we are, another episode of the Religion in the American Experience podcast. What is the history of the Shakers, the United Society of Believers in Christ's second appearing in the United States? How have they shaped us, and how has America shaped them? Why is it important for us to know about them? And who are the last two, now three, surviving members of this religious community? What are they doing, and where are they doing it? And finally, why will an understanding of this fascinating religious thread in the American tapestry equip us to be more effective at perpetuating our democracy, which includes religious freedom as defined by the U.S. Constitution's Article 6 and Bill of Rights religion clauses? As luck or planning would have it, we have as our guest today Theresa Frey-Alexander, who will help us answer these and other questions. Thanks, Theresa, for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So Theresa is the Curator of Education and Interpretation at Shaker Heritage Society, the site of the first Shaker settlement, where she relishes bringing the history of the Shakers to life through innovative, multi-sensory exhibits and programs. She curated Ann Lee, One Woman's Revolution, now on view there. She holds a BA in History from Indiana University and a degree in Education from Siena University. She is also a musician, gardener, artist, and mother. Theresa, once again, thank you for being with us and being our guest on this episode.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
So first, tell us about your background there. But behind you, where are you?
So I'm in the attic of the 1848 Meeting House. It's the one remaining building on the site that is usable year round. So it used to be a thriving village. This is the remaining building. And it serves as our administrative offices, exhibits downstairs, gift shop, and we use the meeting hall that was the Shakers Church essentially for all kinds of public programming. But this is the attic. And it's really remarkable architecturally. These trusses behind me are holding up a big open space downstairs that was really unique and advanced in 1848, without using any steel or anything like that. So,
Wow. So
yeah,
we're seeing some actual 19th century, or I guess 19th century Shaker handiwork. Is that right?
absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And you're in New York.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We're in upstate New York. Yep. So Shaker Heritage Society stewards the grounds of the original Shaker settlement, which is today it's suburban Albany. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. So tell us quickly, how did you become a curator there at the Shaker Heritage Society? What's your sort of story of getting involved here?
Um, I y- the the Shakers kind of found me. People say that like their dog adopted them. I feel like the Shakers adopted me. Um, I wanted to work in a museum. I thought that maybe I needed to go back to school for public history or museum studies, and I talked to a history professor who works with the local public history program, and she said, your degrees in history and education will do you just fine. So I just started to apply to jobs at local museums and historic sites. And I, my executive director now, I think, just saw in my background a lot of different pieces that kind of add up to understanding and appreciating the Shaker experiment. So like you said, I have experience gardening. The Shakers had agriculture based industries. So they had a medicinal herb industry, a seed packing industry, brooms, which they grew the broom corn to make the brooms, and a background with design and working with my hands. And, Shakers are hugely influential in American design and are they have a belief in consecrated labor, right? So they have a belief in every action that you take is an opportunity to worship God. So basically, just I have all these kinds of things in my background
Right.
that have parallels or through lines with
Okay.
the Shakers.
Okay, but you're not a shaker.
I am not a Shaker.
Okay. Um, Now this should have maybe been the first question. What's on everybody's mind? How should we view the Testament of Anne Lee as far as historical accuracy?
So this is complicated. I watched it twice and I had kind of a roller coaster of feelings about it. Um Overall, it's remarkably accurate to Shaker testimony. There's really not a person mentioned that was not an actual person who either wrote about their experiences of the founding era of the Shakers, or who's referred to by other people. So in that respect, it's remarkably accurate to Shaker testimony. Um, On the other hand, there are a lot of liberties taken, especially with the personal lives of founding Shakers and Mother Anne. That some I see where the filmmakers are trying to make a point, and some where I feel like they're a little bit gratuitous and maybe a pinch disrespectful. Um, but overall, I really, really appreciate the the combined effort, right? It's like distilling kind of a 250-year history into one story.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Okay.
I see where they took artistic licenses to make a point, and I think they did a good job. And it's a really beautiful
Okay.
film.
So
Yeah.
from your position, you would recommend people who want to sort of get to know Shakers to watch it
Yeah,
with
I
those
think
caveats. I mean, it's okay to watch.
I mean, from my perspective, it's okay to watch.
Okay.
I think it's um I think it's always valuable to engage, engaging with material doesn't mean that you have to endorse or buy in 100%
Right.
to
Sure.
material.
Okay.
So from my perspective, yeah, I think that it's fine. But it should be a starting point, I'll say.
Yeah.
I think that there are, like I said, the filmmakers take some liberties and it's not entirely accurate, but it's largely very accurate. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Good to know. Okay, Teresa, thank you. So, give us a quick tutorial on the Shakers. Who were they, and what do they believe, or what did they believe?
Okay. So this is a common thing we run into, talking about the Shakers in the past tense. So there are three Shakers in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine. Um so their names are there's Brother Arnold, who is in his late 60s, and he's kind of the he kind of runs the operation, at least public facingly. um Sister June is getting up there in age. I believe she's in her late 80s. And then there's Sister April, who is the newest addition to the Shakers. Um, the Shakers, they're I talk about them in the past tense frequently, because it's my job to talk about the Shakers who lived here at the founding settlement, which closed in 1938. So I frequently refer to them in the past tense, and I also feel like the current Shakers can speak for themselves. So I don't presume to be able to do that. Um, but in terms of who they are, with that caveat, um, they the three C's are often used to describe who a Shaker is, or what a Shaker does. Um, so the three C's are communalism. Shakers live in communal villages, um, and they share resources, and combine resources. They are celibate, so there's no marriage or procreation among the Shakers. Um, and the third C is confession of sins. So in order to become a Shaker, you have to think of every sin you've ever committed and confess. And then at the end of that process would be signing the covenant. um, and so that's like the really boring answer, I guess.
Right.
But
Okay.
it's really it's people who have dedicated themselves to living a communal celibate life, um, and that they're working toward perfection. That's the really kind of beautiful part about Shakerism is it's this life that is dedicated to the hard work of trying to build um, a something as close to perfection as humans can come up with, which is, of course, an impossible task. But
Right. Okay.
it's a life dedicated to labor, and labor as worship. And um, yeah.
What's the theological history? Where did they come from? Yeah, tell us that quick story.
Okay, sure. So, um, theologically, there are a lot of influences on the Shakers, because no one is born a Shaker. They're coming in with all different backgrounds. But the name Shakers comes from it was originally shaking Quakers. So some of the original Shakers had a Quaker background and their worship closely resembled Quaker worship. So they would sit in quiet meditation and wait to be kind of struck with the inspiration to share um what's on their mind or to share what they're thinking about in terms of their spirituality. Um where the Shakers differed was that this could involve jumping, shouting, spinning, or shaking. so so they were as a insults, they were called shaking Quakers. You mentioned before, though, that they called themselves the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing. And that is a gerund, right? That is active, second appearing. Um, they believe that Mother Ann Lee was the basically was Jesus's female counterpart on earth. That through her Christ had appeared, um, and that after that initial reappearance of Christ through Ann Lee, Christ was embodied in all Shakers and in their villages. So that translates into uh, a lived Christianity, right? It's like I said before, every action is an opportunity for worship, and for working toward a kind of Christian ideal of perfection.
Okay. And she brought other Shakers over from England right at the Revolution, right? 1775 or 4, is that right?
Yep, 1774. So, like so many other people in Great Britain, they were after religious freedom. The founding Shakers faced persecution in England, were put in jail for their beliefs. Um, they began to have visions of heading to the New World, and establishing, opening the gospel, were the words that they used. Um, and this is a decade of mass migration from the British Isles to the North American continent, especially the Eastern Seaboard. So they had unique motivation, but they were a part of this huge wave of migration. And then they arrived in, they left Liverpool in 1774 and arrived in Manhattan that same year on August 6th. And this is right as the revolution is really starting to heat up. So they spent 2 years in New York City, and then they left again amongst a mass migration. Um, the British took New York City. It was a brutal occupation. It was bloody and violent, and about 80% of New York City's population fled at that time. And most people, headed out into the countryside or north up the North River, which is today the Hudson River. Um, so the Shakers in 1776 headed north up the Hudson and arrived at the site where I work. One version of the story involves John Hocknell, one of the founding Shakers, following his own outstretched arm to this site, about a mile north of where I am now. Um, Mother Ann arrived here at that site and said she preferred a different log cabin that was just south, and that's actually where our current site is. Um, so that's the, religiously inspired version of the story. The other version is that this land was affordable. It was part of the Van Rensselaer patroonship, and this is essentially the vestiges of the feudal system. And so their rent was just to make the land workable, essentially, to make it into productive agricultural land for 7 years. They didn't have to actually pay any rent.
Hmm. Okay. All right.
Sorry if I went off the tracks
No,
there.
that's great. That's very helpful.
Okay.
So now, can you share? Well, let me ask you this. Um, in a sentence or two, how have the Shakers shaped America, and how has America shaped them? Give us some sense of who they are in the American project. You mentioned a few things at the beginning with their handiwork, um, agriculture. What was their influence on the American project? Let me put it that way.
Sure. So, in a sentence or two, I would say that Shaker, progressive Shaker thought has influenced the social and political landscape, and also design. Um, and that the whole Shaker project or experiment or whatever you want to call it was made possible by the religious freedom that was afforded um, by by the being present in the young United States. Um, so yeah, and I like I said before, no one's born a Shaker, so there's just these endless through lines. But um Yeah, maybe some more
Yeah,
specific
right. Well, let me
ways.
ask you this. You talk about design, and I think that's in the back of many people's minds when they hear shaker. I don't know why, but when you say, I don't have any like specifics as to why that is, but what about shaker design has been influential? What is it, and what has it done?
Okay. Um, well, I mean, it's all rooted in their thinking. Um, so maybe I'll start answering the question by talking about what they believed and then how that translates
Yeah,
into material culture. Um, So, for one thing, they believed in total human equality and still do. um, they have a female religious leader, and that is part of a tradition of female religious leadership in the world and here in America. They were influenced in part by the French commissars who believed that there would be a female messiah. And then, you know, the Shakers arrived here right at the beginning of the United States. So you have other early American, throughout the 19th century examples of this. There's the Universal Friend, Jemima Wilkinson. Um, and then you have people like Rebecca Cox Jackson, who was a Black Shaker, who started a community in Philadelphia. Um, and her big, she had a lot in common with Mother Ann, and she actually was called Mother Rebecca Cox Jackson. So she preached celibacy explicitly as a way for women to have control over their own bodies. It's really like, the origin of the thought of birth control, right? Is So that's a really remarkable, way that their thought influenced larger thinking, um, and the through line. Um, and then there's spiritualism. They were spiritualists. Um, so where we are in New York is, the far end of what's called the Burnt Over District, was an area of religious revival during the 19th century.
Yeah.
Um, so the Shakers went and visited the Fox sisters in Rochester, and the Shakers held seances. They believed that after a person died, they'd attend their own funeral, things like that. And then that led to a whole artistic movement of spirit drawings, all these sorts of, they basically believed that they were conduits receiving messages from the beyond and then conveying those messages through art or hymns, or essays and writings. Um, so um, so that's another interesting
Yeah.
through line. Um, and they were pacifists.
Okay.
So they were the first to receive conscientious objector status. They traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War to receive this status.
Right.
They'd written a number of letters requesting that. So, and their pacifism is, fundamental to their belief system, that you can't be a person of God and be engaged in war, that those two things are incompatible. Um, so, I mean, these are all kind of examples of how, I guess I said a minute ago, like there's this lived religion, right? That
Right.
it's not abstract. It needs to be have a physical embodiment. Um, and that's where their design comes into play. So
Okay.
their villages, they engaged in city planning long before that was a common practice, or maybe a practice at all. I'm not sure when exactly that started, but they thought a lot about how they set their villages up, how they designed
Mm.
their villages. It was always human centered. The individual experience was put at the center, um, insofar as it benefited the entire community.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
so um, you have, and then there's this pursuit of perfection, right? And Mother Ann had a lot of sayings, many of which had to do with work and cleanliness. So she said, "There's no dirt in heaven, and they're building heaven, so there shouldn't be any dirt around. Don't look behind me. We're not
Right. Right.
we're not living up to the standard." But um, but yeah, and she said, do everything as if you might die tomorrow, but also as if you'll live for 1,000 more years. So there's this real intentionality to everything that you're doing. Um, so in order to facilitate those lofty goals and ideals, their design reflected that, right? Everything was designed to facilitate this. So you have things like borrowed light that are now part of the standards for LEED
Right.
certified
Right.
buildings. A well-lit place is easier to keep clean. There's the kind of sterilizing qualities of natural sunlight. So the Shakers were thinking about that. They have peg rails. Peg rails might have existed before the Shakers. They probably did, but the Shakers put them around every single building, every single room in every single building.
Mm.
So
Really?
yeah.
When you say peg rails, pegs to hang things on?
Exactly. So, and they're actually built into the structure of the building. I'm tempted to pick up my computer and show you in the next
Do it.
room.
Yeah.
What's that?
You can do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Sure.
Let's
They are not well kept up, but they're there. Um, so yeah. So here's one right behind me. So
Okay.
there used to be pegs like this in each of these holes. And here's a great example of something that was designed specifically to hang from those peg rails.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so they designed all kinds of things to hang, and including their chairs, which are also very famous for their design. Um, So they designed all kinds of things specifically to hang from those peg rails so that
Wow.
there's nothing on the floor, there's no clutter, you can always reach and find something, everything has a place. Um, so yeah,
Okay.
and then the
Wow.
chairs, I'm going on a lot, I'm sorry.
No, no, don't say sorry. This is great. We could definitely talk for more than the time allotted for the podcast episode. How when did they reach their peak in numbers? And like what's that story?
So they reached their peak around the 1850s.
Okay.
And that's about 5,000 Shakers in about 20 villages. Um, There are more if you include, people who spent a little bit of time living with them, and if you count all of the little villages that didn't ever take off. Um, but they start to decline really following the Civil War. I mean, there's a whole host of factors. There's industrialization, that is, again, this is a larger movement in American history. It didn't just impact the Shakers. When industrialization occurred, a lot of people were drawn away from agricultural life and into the cities, where there were more job opportunities, um, and just kind of a novel way of living, right, in the cities.
Right.
Um, so then, with the Civil War, that's kind of amplified because there's a loss of a huge percentage of the male population. So again, the need for women to work outside the home is increasing. So there's again that pull into more traditional kind of, well,
Mm.
what we think of now as traditional labor. Um, so um, yeah, so there's this pull away from an agrarian life. Then there's um, basically a lot of people who were Shakers were attracted to the lifestyle as much as the religious aspects, right?
Right.
So,
Okay.
and kind of the support network that they provided. So the Shakers filled a lot of roles that are today filled by government facilitated social services. Um, so living communally with the Shakers was a great option, if you were a widow or widower who didn't have a support system. Becoming a Shaker, you have built-in family, you have a roof over your head, 3 meals a day, built-in childcare. Um, so it's really appealing. They also took care of many, many orphans. So basically, the idea is that the Shakers provided social services. And when the government started to do that around the turn of the century. This is just, I think, a little bit before 1900. Um, Again, that's another, you know, that's another nail in the coffin, so to
Mm.
speak. Of course, there, the coffin isn't completely shut. There are three shakers.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but um, but
Okay.
yeah. Um, so
A-
so yeah, I
And
answers you.
yeah, then that was a great answer. They seem to have an influence on American culture much larger than their numbers would suggest. I think we all know the tune, and correct me if I'm wrong here, a gift to be simple.
Yes, I
That's
can't believe
is
I failed to
that's
mention
a
that.
Shaker
So,
hymn, Aaron Copland.
yep.
What can you say about this hitting above their what do they call it in boxing? Hitting above their weight level or something like that.
I know
They
what you mean. Um, I think, I mean, I'd like to think that it's just that they were after something that I think we all would like to aspire toward. Creating a world, at least I hope everybody does, creating a world that is built for the people in it, that's designed to help everyone thrive. Um, I think that that's just really inspiring, and I think that because that's what they were doing within their communities, when they produced something, it resonated with people beyond the community.
yeah.
Um, Also, they were always working together and working really, really hard. Um, so they just always had extra of whatever they were doing, and shared
Mm,
it. Um, you know,
interesting.
but as usually as a business model, but also sometimes as charity. So they were really, really successful business people, which filtered into, the way that anything we all consume reaches us, So they some examples are like the seed packet. They popularized packaging seeds in paper, and
Mm,
they went out on trade routes. They went out the Erie Canal, headed west, all and out from all of their communities to sell seeds, to distribute seeds. Um, so, even if they weren't explicitly missionary actions, which sometimes it was, but they were, penetrating kind of the American experience.
yeah. You mentioned missionary. Did they, since they believed in celibacy, was a lot of energy put into missionary efforts to get people to join with them?
Yeah. And this is an area of the history that I actually haven't had a lot of time to dig into, so I don't want to talk outside of
Right.
my kind of zone. Um, but definitely, yes, they did put energy into missionary work, especially with the spreading of their communities. That's how they ended up with communities throughout New England and in Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky, was through Shakers traveling to those places and engaging, with other people,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now there were 2 members, now there are 3, and these are all they live all of them live up in Maine at Sabbath Day Lake, I think, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
How did this how did this new person decide to join? Do you know? Do we know?
I don't know a lot of the details.
Okay.
Um, I do know that there's a process. You can go to, I think it's mainshakers.com and see for yourself um, what the kind of list of requirements is for becoming a shaker. I think it's kind of a 5-year trial period. You can't have any debt or dependents. It's seems much more stringent than it used to be.
Yeah.
um, that you could just kind of, show up and make a kind of a commitment. Now there's kind of a process. So I know that the newest shaker is Sister April, and she's in her late 50s, and she is from an Episcopalian background. Um, and I believe, again, I don't want to say any, I don't want to, I'm not 100% sure if what I'm saying is right, but I believe that she already was living a religiously dedicated life in some official capacity in the Episcopalian Church.
Okay.
Um, so it's not like a huge pivot per se.
Right. 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 Okay. Um, all right. Let me see. I guess one question, and then the last question I ask all of those I interview. Is there a story that you haven't shared yet that you really would like to share about, something compelling, some story from their history, a person or an event or something that you want to share before we close?
Um, I think that for me, the biggest takeaway with the Shakers is broad. Um, but it relates to specific stories too. Um, it's about this drive to find a way to live that's better for all people, and a way to live that's based on love and a rejection of greed and jealousy, that's really based on, agape love, the idea of love of all other human beings. Um, and this drive they had really was a drive, right? It took a tremendous amount of dedication and hard work. It continues to, like I said, there are still Shakers who are attempting to live a life that is motivated by love, and doing this through hard work, um, and just that this requires, a rejection, like I said, of greed and jealousy, and it requires each individual to put the good of others above their own self-interest. Um, and it's a struggle that continues, and it as evidenced in the lives of especially the early Shakers. It requires stamina and conviction, to continue to be led, by love of mankind in spite of whatever might be happening around you, um, and the forces, that are kind of, pulling in an opposite direction.
Okay.
So that for me, that's the beauty of the whole shaker experiment.
Well, that's great. Teresa, you have the last word. We have been speaking with Theresa Frey-Alexander, the Curator of Education and Interpretation at Shaker Heritage Society. Teresa, thanks for your time and knowledge that you shared that help us learn about the history of the Shakers. I agree, as you mentioned about viewing the film as a starting point. I think this podcast can be a starting point for all of us to understand the Shakers better, for who they were, who they are, and the influence they've had and still have on the American project. I do feel like it has equipped all of us, or at least I can speak for myself, to be better stewards of religion's role in perpetuating the American experiment in self-government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Religion in the American Experience is produced by the private Digital First National Museum of American Religion. Scholarly support is provided by Dr. Lauren Turek and audio and video assistance by Dr. Randall Stevens. The music was composed by Evan Chamberlain.